We dream about it and envision it for decades and decades. And then all of a sudden, it's here, retirement. But what happens when we realize that dream? When retirement becomes a reality? What changes and what do we need to address? We'll talk about it today on Your Game Plan for Retirement. Here with Chris McIntire, president and founder of McIntire Retirement Services. This is Your Game Plan for Retirement. And Chris, we always appreciate your thoughts and perspective on what we need to be doing and paying attention to, what's important in our financial lives.
Yeah, my pleasure to be with you today, buddy.
Yeah, well, Chris, I know that you've been very busy in your personal life, but always taking time out. So I do appreciate the time here, and I think it's an important topic today because retirement is something that for years, for decades, we dream about, and then all of a sudden it's here, and we kind of don't know what to do next for many of us, and we don't know all that goes into it and everything that has changed. So, we're going to talk about some of the main items that planners and those that are looking ahead toward retirement need to realize for when retirement finally gets here.
Yeah, yep. And, it's for us as investment advisors, and, we call it coaches, if you will. Sometimes we're a psychologist and helping people through, the emotion even of retiring as well, because all of a sudden, the concerns that people say is like, look, we're just so used to putting money into things, we're not used to taking it out, and how do we go about that? And just had a great conversation with a client's getting ready to retire even before the age of 65. So we're having the healthcare discussion, and we had some nice software. She's like, God, you make me feel so good. I think we're going to be okay. I'm so glad I came in today. And that's why you do what you do, when you can help people understand that, look, you did a great job. You're going to be just fine here. You don't have any debt, and you've got some substantial savings, and so that's one of that's the good side of it. And obviously then there's the other side where we have to tell people, look, you're not quite there yet. I would work a couple more years, and pad the retirement account as much as you can, and because life is what happens to plans sometimes.
But providing that reassurance on either side, because there's so much unknown and uncertainty. If you can provide reassuring confidence, you're there, you've done it all, fantastic. If you can provide some reassurance that, hey, you can get there, but there's still some work to go. At least we know that too. And I think that's the benefit, no matter where you're at in your progress, of working with an experienced, qualified professional who has seen this transition into retirement, who has seen retirement realized many, many times over, and knows what works and what it takes to make it work. And ladies and gentlemen, if you've got questions, if you would like to get together your game plan for retirement, pick up the phone and give McIntire Retirement Services a call. 419-332-0532. 419-332-0532. And I mean, from the freedom to having all of our time to being able to do hobbies or take trips and vacations, there is a lot to be excited about, Chris. But then we think about market volatility and taxation and inflation, and where's the income going to come from, and what if I have a healthcare event? There's also a lot to be very nervous about. So we dream about retirement for years. When it arrives, the reality can be a little different, and we need to plan out our activities and our mindset, but we also need to carefully plan our finances to make this transition confidently.
Yeah, no question about it. It's the reliability of that paycheck during the working years, and helping people transition to that reliability of a paycheck throughout their retirement is a key component of what we help people achieve. And I suppose, a niche in the marketplace is, creating income out of some of the investments that they have been saving. Because, if you're looking at it, all the 401k statements and whatnot that we look at for the people that are working, predominantly it's in retirement lifestyle funds, like a 2025 fund, 2030 fund, so on and so forth. Those aren't necessarily income generating type of investments, where, we can focus more on, maybe adding an annuity to somebody's portfolio where they're going to get that reliable income, with a contractual guarantee. We might use, in our practice, structured notes that deliver a higher than average interest rate, with some degree of safety in there, I'll say. then dividend stocks and, traditional bonds of different types as well, covered call options, things along those lines. So, the ways that we, generate income, I think gives us a little bit of a competitive advantage in our space, Peter, and to help our clients as well.
Pre-retirement, Chris, paychecks and income is pretty steady and reliable. And then all of a sudden in retirement, no more paychecks. You have to create the income from your investments. And Social Security and pensions certainly help. And bringing all of those pieces together, Chris, is a large part of your job. The goal, a reliable, sustainable, dependable income. But as you're indicating here, those investments that we had in our 401k may not necessarily be the best tools to fill the gap.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And, when you're working, you only have your 401k options that are available in that company plan. You may have been contributing to your own IRA, in bits and pieces as well when you had extra dollars. When you retire, then we can look at doing a rollover into an IRA and broaden out the amount of different types of investments and asset classes that you can utilize, from real estate funds to, like I said, structured notes, using the annuity side of things as well to help, kind of build that structure of income that covers the living expenses day to day. And then you have your nice four, other investments, not to give up on growth, obviously, but income typically becomes more of the focus than growth does.
Chris, there is a good opportunity, a milestone, a benchmark that we should be aware of. A lot of people overlook this opportunity to start to make that transition, and that happens at 59 and a half. Can you talk to us about why 59 and a half is an important point for us to acknowledge and potentially take action for our retirement readiness for when we want to realize retirement, even if we're not quite there yet?
Sure. Yeah. 59 and a half, one of those triggering points. Most of us will think, oh, that's the age I can take money from my IRA account without the early withdrawal penalty. Okay. It's also the age at which you can take some or all of the funds out of your 401k and roll them into an IRA, which is not a taxable event. And I suppose you could do the same thing if you had a Roth 401k into a Roth IRA. Again, not a taxable event as well. And then again, it allows you to do maybe some pre-retirement planning, get some things in place, a couple of years, ahead of your retirement. And, it's very common people want to work to age 65 so they can transition on to Medicare and, and without going out and spending, $1,000 to $1,500 a month or something on health insurance. And, that's a very important component right there, those healthcare costs as well, Peter.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about all of the pillars that you need to address in your planning in order to make a transition once retirement is realized. Once we get to the point where we are accomplishing that dream of being able to retire, how to maintain that with confidence and all that comes next here on your game plan for retirement. But if you would like to get your plan put together, your game plan for retirement, pick up the phone and give McIntire Retirement Services and Chris McIntire a call, 419-332-0532, 419-332-0532. And I know, Chris, we will be talking about healthcare and all that goes in there. That's very different. Insurance coverage, obviously very different. The amount of risk that we are willing to take also needs to be addressed. Maybe not willing to take or should take, or that is appropriate, or that our portfolio can help us to absorb. The risk level does change. And I guess the question there, are you finding that those that have been working and saving and investing for so long during their working career have sort of just become accustomed to risk and therefore don't really address this change that appropriately should be happening to adjust that risk exposure level when we realize retirement?
Yeah, good point you bring up there, Peter. And I think, a lot of that deals with, what is the current, behavior of the stock markets, for example, when somebody's getting ready to retire. This year has been certainly up and down with all the tariffs and, a lot of volatility, but, the market was at record highs, obviously, here recently. And so if you're used to seeing your account grow significantly, it can also go down significantly as well, depending on what type of exposure you have to, obviously the technology sector has been leading the way. The growth market has more so than the dividend payers of the world, which are, typically lower and slower. So, I deal with some folks that say, look, I'm retired now. I don't want to risk anything. And then you get others that say, hey, this strategy has worked well for us to get us to this point here. So, we don't mind taking some additional risk. And, it depends. Do they have a pension plan, real solid Social Security basis? Number of different factors in there, Peter, for a long-winded answer to a short question you asked.
But the focus really does change. I mean, during our working years, it's all about contributions, right? The paychecks coming in, we want growth, we want to build wealth. And then retirement changes to more preservation, diversification, protection, and ultimately withdrawals, creating that income, sometimes whether we need it or not. Like that's another part of retirement that sometimes people just sort of wake up and realize is that the IRS is going to force those withdrawals, whether or not you actually need to take them.
Yeah, you're correct. And we're coming into that required minimum distribution season for those that are, turning 73 or who are already in that phase. And, a lot of times, if they don't need that money, it typically doesn't come out until the end of the year, and, we got a number of clients I just met here recently, and, they were, praising the amount of money that they had earned and saved in their retirement accounts, and then somewhat cursing the government for forcing them to take some portion of that out. And, that's just a reality. That's how they were set up way back in the day. And, the tax environment is lower now. The amount of money you have to take out of the IRAs is at a lower dollar amount than it has been previously. Working their way of bumping the RMD starting at age 75. So, there's been some changes here that have been pretty favorable. There is the ability to do that Roth conversions that, when people retire and start living the dream, they say, hey, all right, you've maybe your contributions are stopping, but your conversions and tax planning is, that opportunity a lot of times comes to life now because your income's lower and you can do some shifting of assets to do the Roth conversions. And that's also happening at this time of year as well.
Is that another realization that newly retired individuals and investors come to, Chris, is that just because I can continue to defer taxes doesn't necessarily mean I should continue to defer taxes or that it's in my best interest, and prompting the conversation about Roth conversions and other tax management and mitigation strategies?
Yeah, without question. And, a couple of questions come to mind when we do that, have that Roth conversion question is, are you converting these funds to the Roth IRA where they're going to be tax free? There isn't any required minimum distributions on Roth IRAs. Are you doing that for yourselves or are we doing this for your children? And, a couple of different aspects. And, because if they're doing it for their children, right, they'd be in most cases, assuming they can get, underwritten, you can take money from an IRA and also buy life insurance if you're wanting to leave it for your children, because most likely you're going to leave a lot more money to them because you're taking your pennies and buying dollars down the road, and if you want to convert Roth IRAs so you can use them, then you probably will stick with the traditional investment mentality. But a lot of people think, well, I don't need any life insurance. Like, all right, but if you convert $100,000 from your IRA into your Roth, right, you might only have $75,000 after you paid the taxes. Okay, so if you took that 75,000 and put it into a life insurance policy, you might have a death benefit of several $100,000 instantly. So, a couple of different ways of thought right there, Peter.
Just always having to consider all of the options, ladies and gentlemen. That's what proactive planning is about. And I really appreciate the perspective of Chris McIntire, president and founder of McIntire Retirement Services, on this program each and every week. And I know that many proactive planners have taken advantage and had more confidence through having a game plan for retirement. And if you would like your game plan for retirement, make that plan yours, ladies and gentlemen, along with the help of Chris and the team there at McIntire Retirement Services. Pick up the phone, give a call, 419 332 0532, 419 332 0532. Looking at planning from the essential pillars of income, investing, taxes, healthcare, legacy, all of those things that change and transition so much when the goal of retirement is finally realized. That's why you need to review your plan and construct your plan if you do not have one, ladies and gentlemen. Give a call again, 419 332 0532, 419 332 0532. Particularly, Chris, this pillar of taxes in the game plan for retirement. I feel like I hear a lot that people discuss that the advisor helped them have access to the market and maybe made some recommendations on mutual funds, maybe even managed the account for them along the way. But really, that the conversation about taxes was largely absent or overlooked or ignored completely during those discussions about building and accumulating the wealth. It's not what you make, it's what you keep ultimately that matters.
Yeah, good perspective there, Peter. And very important to remember that during retirement. If we go back to like let's say the 2008 financial crisis when the market had obviously a very serious correction in it. And while you were working, putting those contributions in during those time frames, I mean, that delivered huge investment results down the road. As you're into retirement now, it's about trying to mitigate those large drawdowns, right? If your account is down by 30%, you need to grow 43% to get it back to where it was, right? So, that's a steep recovery, especially if you're pulling funds out of it as well. So, trying to mitigate those losses is very important. Large losses, right? The market does have its ups and downs. That's why it's really important for the people listening to the show today and our clients as well is to, what is the real risk tolerance you have? How much pain can you endure if we had a protracted recession like 2000, 2001, 2002? That was about 2.5 years of, some significant declines in the stock market indices. And it's hard to believe we're coming up, the 21st anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks. That was in 2001, and that was just some tough times in the stock market over that period where we had the tech bubble of, kind of the original tech bubble. And now, I think some of us get a little bit, paying attention to the headlines on, is there going to be an AI bubble? Are things going to run up so fast that it's unsustainable? And, healthy markets correct, but bubbles burst. So, that's why it's so important in retirement to, build around your real risk tolerance and also have an alternative strategy, have some of that safe money sitting on the sidelines that, can fill the gap until the market recovers for those of you that like to, take some of those chances, for potential higher gains and invest a little more risky.
Well, reviewing and assessing your risk on an ongoing basis, not just once, but regularly and throughout retirement over time. Not only your risk tolerance, how much you feel comfortable taking, but the actual risk exposure that you have in your portfolio. Again, ladies and gentlemen, so much changes as we move from growth to protection to ultimately no earnings and now distributions creating income. Market losses, Chris, are harder to recover from in retirement as we are taking those distributions. And that's why we try to minimize or mitigate that risk in many places, especially as we are creating income. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking today with Chris McIntire, president and founder of McIntire Retirement Services, about retirement realized, that dream of retirement that we have, a confident time where our time is all our own and we get to do all of the things that we want and dreamed about. Chris, so far we've talked from a financial perspective, but we need to actually plan our activity as well. All of our time is ours. We're not showing up to work anymore. A lot of people actually find that kind of intimidating or even depressing. And that's a side of retirement I don't think is discussed nearly enough.
Yeah, and and that's sometimes where we help kind of coach people to say, look, here's what you might expect, and and let's even add in there, all of a sudden husbands and wives are spending all day every day together, and they may not have done that for most of their working careers, right? They came home, had dinner, and dealt with the kids and went to bed, and now all of a sudden they're in retirement, and hey, look, I want to go play golf. Yeah, but I want you to help me do this. So sometimes we have to help people understand what some of those changes are going to be. And, and again, when you're just retiring, your focus is typically on yourself. And as you get a little bit older into the 70s and 80s and 90s, the focus may be on, boy, should I be giving some of this money away in case I go into a nursing home, or, I'd like to see my grandchildren and maybe buy them a vehicle, help them out.
It's transitioning, Chris, from do I have enough to how can I give it away and get rid of it? That's another interesting realization at some point. The mindset pivots in retirement. I was in line at Home Depot and kind of laughing with a guy who said he's doing this just to have some time away. And to earn a little spending cash. He said just to do something and get out of the house and have a little spending cash, he went and got a part-time job. I imagine more people do that than we really realize or think about. Chris, I want to turn though. You had mentioned healthcare earlier in the program, and I think before the end of the program, this is a very important topic to talk about. Insurance changes. Generally, it's covered health insurance through our worker during our working, or through our employer rather, during our working career. We've got obviously Medicare in retirement. And then maybe because we are older now, a few more health related concerns than we had previously, even and up to and including long-term care concerns. So talk to us about this transition from our working career and healthcare and insurance coverage to really what we need to be thinking about the mindset when we are retiring.
Sure, yeah, and I'll just use personally a couple of examples here. My wife is transitioning into Medicare here in the month of September, okay? And so, we're going from private insurance to, the government provided insurance, and, that should save us on deductibles and insurance premiums. And then, I've got a mom that's 88 years old and she's in a rehab facility right now. And, the question is will she get well enough to where she can come back home? Or will she have to stay in the long-term skilled care facility? And then how do you go about paying for that? Medicare only covers so much time in the nursing home, and once that is done, you're either on private pay or you've got to spend your assets down, to where Medicaid will help come in and cover the bill. So we're dealing with that right now. We've recently lost my father-in-law, as you know, Peter. So, we've been had this whole spectrum going on. And, my health insurance at age 60, I think is about $1,200 a month. We don't qualify for any subsidies or anything like that. Where some people do, who have, lower income levels. Obviously, we run a business and whatnot. So, had a little bit of financial success there, just enough to kick us out of any sort of subsidies or things like that. But, healthcare is going to be very expensive, throughout your retirement, because they take $185 a month out of your Social Security benefit for Medicare. My wife, as an example, they're going to take over $500 a month out of her Social Security for Medicare because our income threshold, puts us in what do I want to call? I'm going to call it punitive areas, but means testing. And then, have to buy your Medicare supplement. You have to buy your prescription drug plan, and even on Medicare, you have some out-of-pocket expenses as well. And so for some people listening to the show today, they're going to pay more for health care in retirement than they did their working years because they may have had a great health care plan depending on where they worked.
Hmm. That would be an interesting realization because we think about retirement being affordable or no cost health insurance. To realize all that goes into those costs and that we might even be paying more in retirement, I'm certain has folks discussing. Chris, we appreciate the perspective. And again, today we've talked about the new phase of life, retirement, that thing that we've dreamed about, that we've envisioned for decades of when we have all of our time and we own our time. But it is very different from your working years. Income, investments, risk tolerance, taxes, healthcare, insurance, and even our daily activities all need to be carefully planned and thought through. And that's why you should, ladies and gentlemen, sit down with an experienced, qualified professional who has not just seen this once and done it once and learned from our own mistakes, but has seen it many, many, many times over and seen what has worked and maybe what needs to be addressed so that things work out better. All that you anticipate and expect retirement to be involves planning. And that's, I think, the gist and the real message of the program today is that you must have a plan for the activities, the things that will fill your time, that will give you contentment and satisfaction, but also how to financially support that quality of life. Chris, and I know you talk with many proactive planners, savers, and investors throughout Northwestern Ohio, but many, many, many more need that kind of planning, need to sit down and map things out. And that's exactly why you make the offer as a courtesy service for listeners and viewers of the show to help them construct their game plan for retirement.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's it's very rewarding when you get to help people and show them that, look, you've done very well, very rewarding. And we thank everybody for listening to the show. And may God bless America. Be safe out there. Go Buckeyes.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, to get your game plan for retirement, give McIntire Retirement Services a call, 419-332-0532, 419-332-0532. You can also visit online, McIntireRetirementServices.com, McIntireRetirementServices.com, or 419-332-0532. Once again, Chris, always appreciate it. Thank you very much for being our resource.
My pleasure.
Tune into Chris McIntire's full radio program and visit McIntireRetirementServices.com for many additional valuable resources, including other great episodes of Game Plan for Retirement with Chris McIntire. Be sure to subscribe.
The content of this radio show is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. You are encouraged to seek investment, tax, or legal advice from an independent professional advisor. Any investments and/or investment strategies mentioned involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. Advisory services offered through Brookstone Capital Management, a registered investment advisor.
Fiduciary duty extends solely to investment advisory advice and does not extend to other activities such as insurance or broker-dealer services. Advisory clients are charged a quarterly fee for assets under management, while insurance products pay a commission, which may result in a conflict of interest regarding compensation.